In this tutorial, we're going to talk about how to get your point data into your drawing. Let's get started. Let's open Carlson. And we're presented with the Startup Wizard. We want to create a new drawing, so we'll select New. I'm also going to change the horizontal scale to 20, which is typical for septic design plans. And if I click in one of these other boxes, you'll notice the data changed because this information here is tied to your horizontal scale. You can experiment with changing your symbol size and that sort of thing, and your text size, but for now at least take all of the defaults, and I personally find them to be pretty good, so I don't normally change them. But what we do need to do here is set the drawing name. So let's select Set. And I have created a directory before we started this tutorial called Point Tutorial. And so I'm going to give this drawing that name. And it will add the DWG extension. Don't be bothered by what you see pop up in the dialog below it. It's just suggesting names, and you get a little preview here. I've put the CRD file from our data collector already in this directory, so it's seeing that. But if you care to, you can add the .dwg, but you don't have to. Carlson will do it for you. Save. So now it has saved this blank drawing with that name, or it's about to save it, and we move on. Now we're starting to deal, or we're going to deal with the CRD file itself. It wants to know, first of all, where's the data path for the CRD file, and you want to navigate to the directory that contains that CRD file, which was that directory I call Point Tutorial. You will typically name your directories, or at least I do, the name of the client or something associated with the job. A lot of surveyors use a job number, something that's meaningful to you. So it now knows where to go look for the CRD file. And because it's saying, when we open the wizard, it came up with existing CRD file, it is looking in that same directory for a point file with the same name as your drawing, and it did find one. If this were a new drawing and you were going to manually put the point data in yourself, which we're not going to do in this tutorial, but I will demonstrate it in another, and that would be convenient for if you had old data that was generated by Stadia, using a Stadia rod, and you needed to get it in some electronic format because you shot the topo 10 years ago when you had that particular kind of instrument. In fact, many designers still use Stadia, and there's nothing wrong with that. But you would say New, and you would it would default to putting a CRD file with the name of your current drawing in whatever directory that you selected under data path. But more often than not, you'll be working with existing data. You would say current CRD file, and you'll notice when we opened it, it defaulted to that. But again, one more detail, if you said none, it is going to, you're going to have to do some other things later to set a location for a CRD file and name it and that sort of thing. Typically, we're going to be using current, or if you had data that was being provided by a third party as a text file, had been exported, let's say from an AutoCAD fieldbook as a text file, and you want to get it into Carlson format, You could import it as an ASCII file. It would accommodate that. And if you had your data collector, your instrument, tied directly to your computer, you could download it directly from this point. But I typically find it's convenient to just have the CRD file already in a directory, if your instrument will accommodate that, and then go forward with the wizard. And it says that there were 111 points in that CRD file. And what do we want to do? We want to draw and locate those points in the drawing. But let's not do that just yet. And now we're just brought to our blank drawing area, and we'll now begin to take a look at what's happening under the points menu, which will allow us to bring our points into the drawing. So let's do that. When we open the points menu, you'll see quite a few options available to you. Don't be too concerned about that. The vast majority of them you'll only use on occasion, but there are one or two of the features that you will use on a regular basis. Let's start with the first choice, point defaults. Now, if we had selected in the last startup wizard to draw locate the points into the drawing area, it would have brought you right here to this screen. So when you do this on your own in the future, you could have selected that option and you would end up right here where we are. But I wanted you to be able to see how you could get there using the points menu. And one of the first things that I like to do is change the symbol. For whatever reason, I don't particularly care for the circle. You'll be brought to your symbol library, and you can see that I have some things in my symbol library that you probably don't, but you want to select the points library, and I prefer the cross. And also notice, and there are many things that we're not going to deal with in this particular tutorial that are available to you in the points default menu, but it should start with point number 1. However, if you're adding more than one CRD file to this drawing, you'll want your starting point number perhaps to be different than this so that you don't overwrite points that are already in the drawing. But in general, starting point number will be 1. Carlson automatically wants to place those points on the PNTS layer. You're free to change that. I typically don't. And as you draw points manually, this auto zoom center for new points will, as you enter that point, it will center it in the middle of the screen, and it will zoom in far enough so that you can read it. But in general, we're going to leave most of the defaults just the way they are, and we're going to say OK. Now, let's take a look at some of these other features. List points. If we have already associated an existing CRD file to this drawing, and we have, because you can see at the top of the screen it says CRD and it gives the name Point Tutorial. We could list those points, but I don't want to do that just yet. Import text or ASCII files. That might have come from a third party. We've already briefly discussed that earlier. You would have had an opportunity to do it in the wizard. You can do it again here. If you want to share point data with someone, another AutoCAD user or Carlson user, you could also export it as an ASCII file if they can't deal with a CRD file directly. If we hadn't set the location for the coordinate file, we could do that here. Again, the wizard takes care of that for us. And the coordinate file utilities is an awesome place where many of the routines that you're going to use in the course of generating your drawings will be located. You can see that we could open a CRD file, we could copy another point file, we could convert the format, but typically I would export just as an ASCII file and let the third party import it as an ASCII file. Seems to be less problematic. Compressing CRD files would be taking the blank spaces between your numbering. You're going to see in this point file we actually do skip some numbers, and if you wanted to compress the CRD file, it would renumber it and get rid of all those blank spots. The two options that I do use regularly are update the drawing from the CRD file. Right now we have a blank drawing. The points are not showing. The CRD file is associated with the drawing, so it is connected or linked to it, but we don't have that data actually showing in our drawing. And once we did have that data in our drawing, we could edit. We could, for example, we find a bad shot and we delete it directly in the drawing. It doesn't mean we've deleted it from the CRD file. We've only taken it off our screen. Well, there is a way, if you use the update CRD file from the drawing, you can have it take a look at what's showing on the screen and update the database, the point database, the CRD. Let's start with looking at listing the points. Now you'll remember you could get to it directly from under the points menu, but here's a convenient location. So let's do that. When it opens, it will show you the range of points, and just because it says there are 647 points, remember there may be gaps in the point numbering, so it doesn't necessarily mean that there are 647 points. When we loaded the CRD from the point wizard, it said there were 111. So don't be confused by that. I typically will just say all, even though it defaults to the entire range of points. You can take the defaults and say OK. And we're presented with a pretty simple report that shows the point number. And again, you see there's a gap between 1 and 3. So we skip the number 2. And the northing, easting, and elevation, the actual coordinate data, X, Y, and Z. And a description, a brief description. Don't be confused by my descriptions. Every office uses something a little different. I use R for random shot, which would just be a grade shot. And try to use just some short abbreviations that are meaningful to me. If you're using a feature called Field to Finish, your description codes are going to be very important and will be standardized within your office so that Carlson can interpret those descriptors and actually generate line geometry within the drawing. Very useful feature, and we'll get to that in another class. So here you see all your point data, and that's the list function. I like to open the list before I make any edits and print a copy, a hard copy of it for my file.